So, Pete, I'm going to come to you now, see if there's any questions from the chat room.
Yeah. We've got some great questions, actually. First of all, have you ever... how do you go about using a critic's quote? In other words, does somebody need your permission to use a quote on a poster or a DVD?
Theoretically not. It's quite odd. If it's in the magazine, it's sort of considered to be in the public domain. Most of the big studios will ask. They'll kind of, they'll, just as a kind of formality, they'll phone up, say, TimeOut magazine and say, would it be okay if we used this quote? One of the things I had quite recently was that I had written what I thought was a very nice sort of phrase in this review, and they've sort of phoned up and said, could we use this? But they bowdlerised the quote. They'd actually changed it slightly, and they'd made it into something which actually was grammatically incorrect, which they were going to put my name on. And I was like, no way am I having my name on something that's great. But just to cut to the chase, they can generally use pretty much anything that you've written because it's in the public domain, and sometimes you do get misquoted. Now, for instance, there was a film called Sibling Rivalry with Kirstie Alley a few years back, which was not a good film, it must be said. And it involved a scene, I'm not quite sure how I can say this without getting censored, in which Sam Elliott and Kirstie Alley indulged in some quite energetic sex. And Sam Elliott died in the act. And there's a scene where she has to remove the condom from his still engorged member, shall we say, and this is a comic scene, blah blah blah. So I mentioned this in the context of the review, which basically said this film is shit, it's really not very good, blah blah blah. Laugh, I almost changed my method of contraception. And then this quote, laugh, I always changed to my method of contraception, made its way onto the poster as if this was somehow a kind of validation of the movie and how funny it was, when in fact what I was trying to say was it wasn't altogether good.
Right. Any other questions?
With indie movies moving on to online distribution, what's the best way to get your movie reviewed? That's
a very good question, I think. I mean, obviously people are a little bit reluctant to send out DVDs because I know certainly from the horror circuit, when DVDs start floating around at horror film festivals, they quite often end up online. Somebody somewhere will take one of those DVDs and they'll upload it, and then the film might come out in Spain. Say I've been in Sitges at the film festival there. The film might come out in Spain. No one understands why they haven't been. Well, the answer is because everybody's downloaded it from the internet. I personally think it would be nice to move to a situation, both for critics and for filmmakers, where you could stream the movie, but some kind of individual encrypted key would be available to you only and for a limited amount of time. So if somebody said, well, look, we've got this movie and you can stream it from here. This did happen to me recently with a relatively medium-sized company. They just said, look, we've got this version and we're experimenting with this. We'll send you this thing and you'll need a password, but it will only be good for a few hours. And then you can log on, you can stream the movie onto your computer and watch it. And I think that's probably a safer way for filmmakers, because you're not running the risk then of bootlegging it. I guess there are ways of recording streams. I don't know. I don't want to know, frankly.
But what is the future for independent filmmakers who are moving to self-distribution, who are moving to online platforms, but still want to engage with you?
Well, that's tricky, because I am very suspicious of a lot of what goes on online. There is a lot of fanboy nonsense online, and there are a lot of people who think that they're writers who aren't, and there are a lot of people who think that they're critics who aren't. There's a famous Francois Truffaut quote, the famous French film director, who said, everybody in France has two jobs, their own and film critic. And that's what's happening now, and I'm kind of a bit suspicious of that in a way. And I think that most old school, journalists like myself will be a little bit kind of suspicious of that. Hammer tried it with that thing that they did, the movie that was kind of in bits and you could watch 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there, and it was all a bit modish, and it actually wasn't a very good film ultimately, and I didn't think it worked. The truth is, if you can get the film into a theatre, it is going to give it some kind of credibility. You know, you're going to be able to say to people, look, this film played at the Empire in Leicester Square, and when you're trying to do a video sale or sell any of the rights on to someone else, the fact that it actually got shown in a proper, you know, theatre in a proper cinema is going to make a difference. Yes, you can try and distribute it yourself. Friends of mine have. My friend Susie Harewood made a film and she tried to distribute it herself, Bigger Than Men. But in the end, you're just making grief for yourself, because if you're not going through the normal channels, which you think maybe are not available to you, it's harder to get to the journalists unless you've got a PR company on board who's kind of got a list of people. I mean, at a very basic level, PR companies have a list, and they can put you onto those people on that list. And if they're good PR companies, and it's a low-budget horror movie, for example, they'll know who to go to and who not to go to. They'll focus the attention on those people who know. Okay, so Pete, final question, or are we out of questions?
No, we've got plenty more, but final question from Danny Lacey. Has your opinion of a film ever changed during a second viewing?
Yeah, definitely. There have been a number, actually. It's curious. Sometimes you see a film, and again, as I was saying earlier, it's possibly a question of context. You know, you can see a film at a festival and it seems absolutely fantastic because of the atmosphere that you're seeing it in. Sometimes, let's be honest, it's a subjective business. Certain days you go into a film and you just don't tune into it. You know, I hope that I'm alive to that, because I think there have been times when I've seen films for the first time and I haven't really got it. I mean, a lot of the hype that comes down the pike now, it's very hard as a journalist not to be aware of that, because obviously you've got to keep up with what's coming down, what's being made, you know, this kind of money that's being poured into it, and you're subject to that in exactly the same way as you know, people out on the street waiting for it to turn up at the multiplex are. So there is a sense in which you've got to maintain some kind of distance, and sometimes you just have an off day. You know, you go and see a picture and you think, you come out and you talk to your mates about it and they go, well, no, it was really good, and I go, oh, I didn't get it. But if I'm there with a bunch of people, especially if they're a bunch of horror guys and they're people whose opinions I respect, so if I'm there with like Alan Jones from Fright Fest and Kim Newman, who I defer to on All Points Horror, or, you know, Mark Kermode, or any of the people that I respect, if they're saying to me this is a good picture, then I might go back and give it another look. I still might not agree with them, and I might, you know, just say, well, you know, to me this is kind of like a 2-star movie because this doesn't work, but I will have at least had another go at it. And I've often tried to do that with things that I don't get the first time around.
Okay, so final question, which I always ask everyone: what single piece of advice would you offer an emerging filmmaker or an emerging writer? It can be anything, life advice, writing, filmmaking, anything you want.
My God. As a critic, I'm really not qualified to answer that question, because the truth is, you know, I've never been there at 3 o'clock in the morning when everybody's tired, everybody just wants to have something to eat, or a beer, or a pizza, or just go home, or anything. You know, I've never experienced what that's like. I've been on a set, I've seen how grindingly slow it can be, what an effort it is to make a movie. But I do think that if your heart is truly in it, I mean, because there is a level of cynicism, I think, about a lot of people who make their first film, that there's a temptation to make a calling card movie. Don't make that movie. Even if you think that's the movie that might get you noticed, don't do that movie. Do the movie that you think you poured everything in. If you see, Mean Streets is not actually Martin Scorsese's first film, because Boxcar Bertha was before that, but if you see Mean Streets, everything that Martin Scorsese ever is or was or will be is in that film. Everything he ever did was in that kind of 100-minute movie, and it's extraordinary how much of himself he poured into that. Sadly, we're now at Shutter Island, which is another area altogether, but the passion and the kind of love of cinema that you see in a film like Mean Streets, that's what you're aiming for.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming to share your wisdom with us. We can catch you on Radio 5 Live, can't we, when you're stepping in for Mark?
Yes, I'm not quite sure when the next one is. There was talk in the middle of February, but it might be a little bit later. Right. And I've just done something for the film programme on Radio 4, which is going out tomorrow. And, you know, I'm doing radio stuff here and there and reviews in TimeOut. If people are that interested, that's where I am.